Deputy Administrative Officer in the County Executive's Office and Chair of the Affordable Housing Work Group that the County Executive established. And here we are for meeting number 3. So I want to offer my continued gratitude for the time that everyone is putting into this important endeavor. Subsequent to our second meeting last month, we convened a number of subcommittees so that the time commitment to the group has expanded somewhat. I know that each of those subcommittees met, I believe, last week as well. So thanks for your time there for those that participated. And we're going to have a portion of the agenda dedicated to report outs from the subcommittees a little bit later on. We have an agenda today which was distributed to the group, but just to quickly run through it, we will review and approve the minutes from our previous meeting. We have a special guest today who we will introduce in a moment. We'll do subcommittee reports. As always, we'll have open comments and discussion among the work group. We have time reserved for any public comments or questions to the extent we have any members of the public participating today. Just as a reminder that the best way to submit comments or questions to the work group is via the chat feature in WebEx, which we will be monitoring throughout the meeting. And then we will adjourn once we get through all of that. So first order of business, and I know we just sent it out this morning, so we will pause and give everyone a chance to review if you have not had the opportunity to do so, but is review and approval of the minutes from our last meeting. So they were distributed by Lisa via email this morning. If you haven't had a chance to look at them, please take 2 minutes to take a look at them. And once we get through that, we will entertain a motion and a second to approve those minutes. So let's go ahead and take a minute to look at those if you haven't already. Okay, would anyone like to make a motion to approve the minutes from last month's meeting?
So moved.
Second?
Second. Casey.
Anyone opposed to the approval of the minutes? Not hearing any objections, the minutes from last month are approved, and they will be posted to the work group's webpage on the county website to refer back to if anyone needs them. Okay, great. So moving on to the next agenda item, we have a special guest with us today who is Mr. Stacy Span. Stacy is Executive Director of the Housing Opportunities Commission and has done a lot of really important work in the affordable housing space in some of our peer counties. And it was suggested by a number of members of the work group and county staff that Stacy would be a great person to talk to in connection with our work here. So Terry Hickey, I'm going to allow you and Marcia Parham Green to tell us a little bit more about Stacy, introduce him, and then Stacy, we'd love to hear more about some of your work. And Stacy, just before I hand it over, I'm not sure how much you know about us, but just to kind of set the stage a little bit, this is a work group that was created by County Executive Chesky to focus on affordable housing questions and issues in Baltimore County, specifically ways that we can spur the creation of additional affordable housing to support our goals in the affordable housing creation space, be it looking at land use policies, zoning, incentives. We've had lots of discussions about messaging and communications around affordable housing and having to go with communities when projects are proposed. We've talked about financing and incentives and ways to work with affordable housing development community. So all of the things that I know that you have a lot of experience with, this group has been appointed by the county executive to grapple with, and we will be convening as a group a number of times over the next few months. We've got subcommittees established on public education and communication strategies, zoning and infrastructure, legal policy and best practices, and collectively we'll be reviewing some data. We will be making some observations and making some recommendations to the county executive in a report for new policies or programs to implement to help us achieve our goals here in the county. So that's a little bit about us. Terry, Marcia, I will let you give Stacy a proper introduction, and then Stacy, if you wouldn't mind just talking a little bit about your work.
Sure. Great. Well, honor to introduce you, Stacy. The funny thing is, I think a lot of folks on this call know you in many ways much better than I do. Since I've been doing housing work in the county, I think what's funny is that every time we start to talk about creative solutions that take into consideration county governments, the public community, and the development community, your name seems to come into the conversation as somebody who has found creative ways to work amongst often sometimes opposing, at least initially opposing positions to get things done, to get the deals to happen. And I think what is maybe more unique than not in your work are the results and seeing what's actually gone on in the different jurisdictions where you've been. So Marcia threatened that she has some great war stories about working with you, but I also think her connectivity issues on WebEx are a little off. So she might be able to spare you that for now, but I'll give Marcia a second, and then would love to just hear you talk a little bit about the results that you've seen, some of the challenges you faced, and some of the ways you've worked to overcome them. I think that'll be highly inspirational for this group and the purposes Drew laid out. Marcia, you have anything to add, or will we spare Stacy the anecdotes to begin?
It looks like she may have dropped off inadvertently or whatever.
You're gonna luck out on this one. We'll go right to you, Stacy. The floor is yours.
It means I'm off the hook. So first off, good afternoon, folks. I hope you're all doing well after that long weekend. and maybe some of you doing well in spite of the long weekend. So this isn't interesting, right? Because I mean, I think at the heart of this whole thing is, well, how do you do what you do? And I don't really have a good answer for you. But what I'd like to start with is what you all are trying to extract from this whole construct, right? Because all it is a set of rules. I mean, it's these are zoning regulations like any other, like height restrictions or setbacks or minimum green space, number of parking spaces, and I think the magic is finding real meaning for housing within that. And I think a lot of folks are they think of inclusionary zoning as this elixir that sort of gets passed by a county council or a city council, and then boom, everything clicks into place. And the unfortunate truth of this is that that's not going to happen. That's not how it works. And it really does take the entire continuum of government, and I would say federal, state, and local, private sector partners, nonprofits, communities themselves, advocates, and others to make this thing happen. And I'd include in that the folks who are doing the financing. And so I think that inclusionary zoning in and of itself is an incredible tool. It is a good fire starter, right? It's good kindling. And then it also adds really good structure, but there has to be some rationale for why you're doing it, and then how you're going to approach it. Because I've seen it also elsewhere in the country fail spectacularly. It just, it sits on the books. No one does anything with it. The restrictions themselves are incredibly rigid. There's no room for real creativity. And yet, at the end of it, the affordable housing that we hoped and dreamed of doesn't actually come to fruition. Part of the reason why is because we get in our own way around how to approach this stuff. And so I won't profess to you that I'm some magician or even particularly adept person at this. But what I do have is a willingness to kind of stumble through it and make mistakes and get a bunch of different perspectives. And I think what that offers is good fodder for animated discussion. And I'm looking at Steve Lafferty, who was deputy director of housing, of planning when I started in Howard County. And what I will tell you is, yes, there was an inclusionary zoning program in Howard County, and yet there were loopholes all over the books that allowed developers to avoid delivering on that moderately priced housing. In particular, both rental and for sale. And, mission one was to try and find, a few good developers who were interested in kind of pushing the envelope. So, that gets you to who are your partners going to be. So once you've cobbled together, and hopefully you're not doing this from whole cloth. I mean, the one piece of advice I'd say is don't start with a blank sheet of paper. Go steal somebody else's inclusionary zoning. It's like the biggest thing you can do is steal their stuff, and they'll be more than happy to tell you the mistakes that they made and the issues that they had and so forth. And once you do that, you have to step back and ask yourself, how is this going to deliver the thing we thought we were going to get? And in order to really get the answer to that, you got to have some developers who are not folks who were doing it 20 years ago, but people who are doing it today, given the financing construct and challenges, the timing, those folks who are actually actively engaged in CDAs, tax credit program, and other financing from CDA, those folks who are actively engaged in bond issuance. And then you need to understand what those localities, every single one of them, who are offering up what appear to be relatively successful or horrifically terrible inclusionary zoning programs. You gotta wonder, what's the magic sauce? What's happening? What else is going on so that they achieve either a modicum of success or they fail? And so, because the inclusionary zoning piece of it is literally, I mean, it's literally a set of laws, right? And then some rules. And those rules and those laws append to the existing environment in Baltimore County in this case. So doesn't really matter what Montgomery County did, doesn't matter what Howard County or Baltimore City does. It has to actually be congruent, and there has to be some level of compatibility with the environment in Baltimore County. And that's a fact. Otherwise, it's just going to sit there, right? And then you've got to have some folks like like Jim French, who isn't ever afraid to disagree with anyone, but he does it politely, right? To kind of give you a sense of how well or poorly he thinks it'll go in his experience, right? And then find some other developers, right? One of the worst things I can see, I've seen that's been done, is that people, they develop their inclusionary zoning with one type of developer in mind, an affordable housing developer, right? Why would you do that? Affordable housing developers don't need the inclusionary zoning. They're looking for subsidy, they're looking for land, they're looking for other support. So they don't necessarily need the inclusionary zoning. And by the way, wherever land is cheapest or free are often parts of our community where we've seen the least investment already. That ain't exactly where we need inclusionary zoning, unless someone has announced that there's going to be significant investment in a metro station, right? Or the next biotech opportunity is going to. Those are the only instances in which you need to sort of go in and have inclusionary zoning in areas that have suffered from disinvestment. So the reason we want inclusionary zoning is because we want full spectrum housing, functioning neighborhoods, right? Communities that welcome folks and dignify family and offer a level of connectivity to services and goods, recreation, education. We want to have that sort of universal appeal, and we want it to be as level as possible for all folks to access. That's the reason, or those are the reasons that this sort of body of work around inclusionary zoning exists. And so from that standpoint, you pull back and you ask yourself the really ugly, really difficult questions. How are folks going to react? And what is the thing that's going to make them react differently? So let me tell you what it was for us, right? Because when I started in Howard County and we wanted to redevelop what was Guilford Gardens, there was a ton of opposition. And it's not always the opposition you think it is, right? But for us, I started with a parcel that we already owned, right? Housing Commission owned it, so I didn't have to ask a whole bunch of permission. Fortunately, the inclusionary zoning construct was already there, and then over a series of months, we essentially had a design charrette with a number of development teams and got them excited about what our vision was. So it really did start with what our vision was. Now, there was a Title I school right next door, right? That principal called me and was upset. She said, if you shift the income spectrum here, then I'm going to lose that money, which means I can't support teachers. Had never thought about that, right? Why? Because why would I? I was from my perspective, I was the kid who lived in subsidized housing, who wanted to go to a school that was healthy with the highest level of academic opportunity, right? That's my perspective. That's what I'm trying to give all the other kids. And so the question is, how do you meet somewhere in the middle? And the truth of the matter is sometimes you can't. So you got to figure out, well, what's going to be the greater good? Right? What's the opportunity? For me, it's two things. What's going to be the thing that makes someone who's gone away from college, gone away to college or graduate school or wherever, hasn't been here, is going to drive down, in that instance, Oakland Mills Road, look over to the right or left and say, what is that? Right? Slam on the brakes, maybe get another minor, tiny little fender bend, tiny, right? But we want to cause a head turn, right? We want to cause the neighborhoods or the communities that are homeowner owned across the street and adjacent to look at themselves and say, well, we might want to, on the HOA invest in some new signage and spruce our stuff up a little bit, right? Because these guys across the street have really beefed this thing up. And so that means great design, like incredible market rate focused design, because the way that I always insist on designing communities is really simple. This is a market rate community, happens to have some affordability in it. But is it really my business? In my neighborhood, I ask this question all the time. Should I know how my neighbors pay their mortgage? Do I need to know how much money they make? Do I need to know that they adhere to the rules of the HOA and that we can be good neighbors? Like, can I actually go and ask them next door, hey, what do you do? How much you make? Did you get some inheritance to help you with the down payment? What's happening with that alimony money? Right? Oh, hey, buddy, I saw you get a new car. Palimony? Right. No, you can't ask that. And so if we can't do that of folks who are middle class and above, why should we be broadcasting or designing communities that broadcast to the whole world how under-resourced the customer happens to be? Why should we put that burden on folks when we can do the opposite? Let's lift them up. Let's give real value, and let's sort of build it for a lifetime. Right? That's a whole different perspective. That's not scarcity. Right? And I think, unfortunately, there are inclusionary zoning laws on the books in this great nation that start from a scarcity perspective. And I don't think this is that. Right? But we want to honor whole community. So good design. I say good. I mean awesome design. Right? That is functional. That also takes into consideration that some portion of that community might be seasoned. Those older citizens among us. Some of those folks may have some physical challenges. Doesn't limit their potential or who they are, right? And so that design has to incorporate all of those things and make them a part of the community as well. And then I personally like to mix incomes. I say personally, I mean professionally. I insist on it, because what happens often is that folks will say, and they'll present all the time, hey, we're going to do a building and it's going to be 100% low-income housing tax credit. And I'm like, that's awesome, but you got to find someone else to work with. It's not going to be us, right? And the reason why is because, and I love the tax credit program. It's an important program. It's the most prolific producer of affordable housing in our nation's history. It's a fact, right? It's a fact. But the way it goes about it, or at least it has gone about it prior to the last 5 years, has not in fact been caused the greatest level of dignity in some communities. And so there is a way to layer the subsidies, whether it's tax credit or project-based, Section 8 or home funds, even CDBG funds. I mean, there are ways to layer the subsidies, and affordable housing, mixed income housing often will have many, many layers of financing to include conventional, or, lately we've started to migrate toward mezzanine debt financing, private and private equity. The trick is that how you retain principal control of the asset, right? Really hard. But it's because of the bones inclusionary zoning that you can even play around in that environment. That's the real trick, right? And so it has to be flexible enough so that you can deliver to that workforce component, because there are inclusionary zoning laws that include a well-defined workforce range. There are those that include a moderate range, almost none. Think about this real quick. Yeah, I actually can't think of a functional one. Let me modify my language just a little bit. I can't think of a functional set of inclusionary zoning laws that includes low, very low, and extremely low. So below, I think I can think about 2 or 3 that have 55% of area median income, but no more that go below. And so that's a question you have to ask yourself. Just, can this inclusionary zoning set of laws that we pass provide for an opportunity for some level of very low or extremely low, for some level of non-elderly disabled, right? And so if your answer is maybe, or if your answer is yes, then you then have to ask the other question: how? What's the likely financing source? And so what I can tell you in 90% of cases is that someone's going to say, well, the source has to be Baltimore County. And so that is the next rung: inclusionary zoning, and now you need some local financing. And you got to figure out what that looks like. You have a model. We just announced it, and we're pretty close to issuing the bonds for it. We have a housing production fund, but I want to be clear: it ain't like we developed the idea from whole cloth. We stole it, right? We stole the idea and made some modifications to it so that it fit our climate. We stole it. So, you guys have got, one of the things about this state, which I think is extraordinary, is that folks have a tremendous amount of reach. You've got the Colvin Institute at University of Maryland, not that far from you, focused on these housing issues. I'm sure they die to do some work on this stuff for you all, some research for it. But I mean, it's not simply the inclusionary zoning. I know that I'm supposed to be focused just on that, but I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about how you finance these things.
Jason, just to jump in to clarify, we're focused more broadly than inclusionary zoning. I think we anticipate that's going to be a topic of discussion, and I anticipate recommendations around that. But our charge from the county executive is broader than that as well. So
all right, fantastic.
Your comments, are relevant. So
okay, all right, I appreciate that. So we've got now inclusionary zoning. We've got some county supported financing, and then there has to be, look, I'm not going to tell you need to change your budget process, but there has to be some consideration from an operational standpoint, but also from capital funds related to housing and this stuff in particular. Because what's going to happen inevitably is that there's going to be some county-owned parking lot or some piece of land, something where there's an air rights opportunity or whatever it is, and some developer in her genius is going to approach you all and say, hey, got a phenomenal idea, right? Want to make sure that we deliver on this promise of affordability. Need some subsidy from you all to make it happen, right? And they're going to say, yep, the land is awesome. Thank you for that subsidy. But we also, or the air rights are awesome. Thank you for that subsidy. But we also need some actual, cash money. And that, when you're in this realm of affordability, particularly, let me just break it down for you. When you get below 80% of area median, right? Folks are looking for some level of subsidy. And I want to give you what is the bellwether indicator of this, right? The low-income housing tax credit program now allows you to go up to 80%. There's income averaging opportunity in the low-income housing tax credit. right? Why? Because they recognize that unless you, any of you who live in a functional neighborhood that's been around for more than 20 years and it's stayed healthy, right? But it has a mix of housing sizes and the lots look slightly different. It's not like, it's not like a cookie cutter neighborhood, right? That thing has been successful in part because there's a mix of incomes. There's a range of affordability that is part of that community, and that's not by accident, right? That's how community was designed. Everyone couldn't afford the same house, right? And so there was some consideration. So now, fast forward to where we are today, and folks started to realize, you know what? This is great. This low-income housing tax credit thing is awesome, but they're limiting folks to 60% of area median. And at the end, as Jim French knows, man, these numbers don't add up. Like this thing is ridiculous. There's no way we could have projected that COVID was going to happen, right? Or we weren't going to have enough reserves. Or, the market study read that this would happen and this would happen, and it's happened a lot slower than we thought. Uh-oh, got a problem. At the end, the P&L doesn't look good. Income averaging allows you to actually infuse some higher level income into that building, making it healthier, less dependent. That's important, right? But it's a reflection on what the inclusionary zoning program ought to offer as well. And then, I have to say, there ought to be some emphasis on infrastructure, right? And transportation embedded into any thoughts about inclusionary zoning laws. Because what you don't want to do is put somebody out in the hinterlands, right? They got no car, and then somebody declares we're going to throw up a building, and we recognize our customers aren't going to have any parking, which is to say they're not going to they're not going to have a car. How are they going to get to work, right? And the bus line, as great as a bus line is, right, there we all have to admit that some lines are more reliable than others. Some run more regularly, and even then the hours are still crunched, right? And so that's a hard lesson for folks to get who are working 9 to 5s. And so my executive team, they learned it the hard way, because they kept saying to me, well, I mean, we operate from 8 to 4. And I just asked simply, is that reasonable? Does that make sense for the single parent mother who lives in Gaithersburg but works in Rockville? Does it make sense, right? Who doesn't have a car, right? And Uber is not cheap, right? It's expensive to be poor, by the way. It's like it's expensive to be poor. So, so they kept disagreeing, and so the only lesson there for me was, well, as part of our homework, right, in the middle of January, you guys drive to one of our office buildings, the one that's furthest from your house, park your car, hop on the bus, come to the main office, make sure you sign in, because you gotta miss that connecting bus, right? Make sure you sign in, and then go back to your car. Tell me how you felt, right? Because you're also now, in taking on this inclusionary zoning component, you have become a 24-hour government. People's housing problems don't stop. And so you have to then ask yourself, what challenges are you all creating or realizing as a consequence of taking this on too? Because there are others. And so some of the inclusionary zoning, some of the financing, some of the partnerships, they've got to support in a way that you probably haven't had to before. And it just means you have to ask the really, really hard questions. So what I'm going to do at this point is shut up and give you a chance to ask questions in the hope that I might actually be able to answer it in a meaningful way.
Thank you, Casey. That was extremely informative. So the floor is open for questions.
This is Amy. I was wondering if you could speak to how the volume of NPU units getting produced has changed over the years versus other strategies that HOC employs to create new units, and have you changed the law over time to address that?
So that's the thing. I think there's a reluctance generally to open the law up because there are folks who love it and there are folks who hate it. So that's another thing that you're going to confront. There's going to be a whole group of folks who are not particularly happy. That people who happen to make a little less money or be less well resourced are going to be able to move into their neighborhoods. I think reliance on inclusionary zoning is a poor strategy to expand in affordable housing. It is a key strategy, but a singular reliance on that as a tool is a non-starter. It won't work, right? Not if you want to make a real headway. And so we've essentially transformed our agency from just a public housing authority into a full-sale, highly aggressive developer. And we're acquisitive. We partner with everyone. I mean, I take knocks all the time for it. But there's only one way to house folks, and that's to house them. And I think if there is a toolkit, it's every single thing the private sector does, right? But turned on its head. And I'm telling you that that's the play. It ain't a secret. I'm just a nerd. And I refuse to be outdone. Because we're serving folks who happen to be less well resourced, and so we've been aggressive in acquisition. We've been aggressive at redeveloping and densifying our own portfolio. We've been aggressive at partnering with financial institutions and banks and other nonprofits and private sector folks, and we will partner to issue bonds for other developers. We will partner with the state on low-income housing tax credit opportunities. Name it, and we'll consider it. We don't, we're not running away from a challenge. I think that, the important part about that is having the right partners. And so for us, it means having the right attorneys, the right development partners, the right construction managers. I think right now, I wish I were kidding, but we're at the point, I think we have somewhere around 15 to 20 active developments right now. But it's taken, it's nearly 10 years since I started. Some days it feels like it was just yesterday that I started, but most days it feels like it was 10 years ago that I started, right? Against quite a bit of opposition, but it's really difficult to oppose something when it's absolutely elegant and offers a level of beauty and majesty to a neighborhood. It's hard, right? Instead, folks are like, well, I want to live there, right? Or you get the opposite reaction. It's like, how are you gonna put folks who barely make any money in there, right? I'll take that reaction every single day.
Casey, this is Steve Lafferty. It's great to see you again, and thanks for all you did in Howard and now in Montgomery. So two sort of comment questions. One is, as to your inclusionary zoning comment, as Baltimore County gets built out more and more, inclusionary zoning opportunities dwindle.
Yeah.
But how do you then, in a county like Baltimore, which has been primarily development has been developer driven.
Mhm.
The county has not taken the role that you have in Montgomery or you were in Howard. How do you flip the script, as Marsha Parham Green would frame it? How do you flip the script from being, my terms, not the county's terms, more passive as our own role, and relying upon the development community to come forward and then working with them to create a project, as opposed to taking the lead? It
Yeah.
we can't wait 10 years, but we also can't do it overnight. So your thoughts on, sorry, how do you change
Sure.
that dynamic?
Sure. So one of the things that, first of all, it's an exciting county, right? And it's not small. And you've got these nodes that are tremendously exciting, that are screaming out for density. And so the first thing is taking stock of what county-owned property you have there. Doesn't matter what it is, right? And then the next step is, well, what's the transportation opportunity? And if that means it's a big major bus line, you take it, right? You take it. But just taking stock of it. If it means it's near significant road transportation, you take that too. And you could very easily consider just putting out 2 or 3 of those to the development community broadly, with some aspiration, and it could include the level of affordability, right? And depth, right? With a limitation on subsidy, and then you see what nibbles you get. But you have the ability to drive that just by using some of the land holdings that you have. And when I say you, the county, I mean, it could be in partnership with state transportation, even because it's a locality. You have the ability to then go and garner some of those holdings that are underutilized even by the state and reimagine them. So I think that's one. I think the other is it does not help. It does not hurt to have a moonshot development idea, right? Those are pretty incredible because what they do is get everyone excited. And so perhaps there's something on a rail line that didn't quite get off the way it was supposed to. Just 1 or 2. Imagine what those are and offer them up. But you can put constraints on what's there and what's not there. And the other thing is, you're not out of, just because developer A wins the opportunity, the other ones are ranked. You want to rank them, and you want to make sure they're serious, but you're negotiating. And if the negotiation, look, developers are like anybody else. They got feelings. They want folks to like them. They want to do well. And so you have to use the thing that they're most excited about to your advantage, just as they're going to do with you. And so you're negotiating until you're not. And sometimes developer A comes to you with the idea, and they're the ones who actually see it through. Other times doesn't work out, and you go on to developer B. But you have to have the will to do it, and put a timeline on it, and just be disciplined about it. And what'll happen is the market, folks will start seeing the opportunity and get really, really excited. There's some others. I'd say, that what we're seeing nationally is that, Black and brown communities, communities that have suffered disinvestment are now having a greater voice. And I think it makes sense to be compassionate about that early on and set, those MFD, not goals, mandates, right? I think it makes sense to, I want to see, and I've told this to my team, why don't we have a Latinx woman who runs a development company partnering with us? When are you going to find her? Right? These are important things because community does as well as we allow ourselves to do. And so I think, I mean, those are 3 ideas, Steve. I'm happy to talk to you about it ad nauseum, but you're going to have to try some stuff, a lot of stuff. Sometimes it'll fail, right? Sometimes it won't. You know, I got a couple failures in there too. So,
Can I ask?
Appreciate it.
I'm Leslie Dickinson from Disability Rights Maryland. And so I think you probably answered. Can you hear me?
yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I think you might have answered some of this to Steve Lafferty's. But in terms of, you were saying the inclusionary zoning is a key, but it's not, I forget the other word you used. It's not the panacea, certainly. So what would you, to a county that's nowhere near as close to what Howard and now and Montgomery, certainly not. Do you have any ideas for them to what to put in that toolkit like early on? And what you just said was spot on and really, really good. But just in terms of that practical funding for some people who are maybe not as enthusiastic as you are, do you have any really specific recommendations? And just to say, this is, I'm sure you're aware that there's a voluntary compliance agreement with the county.
Yes.
And they need to have guard units built
Sure.
in places of opportunity. Yeah.
Sure.
So, all right. Thank you.
I mean, look, for me, practically, it's do it. Like, you got to enter into the heart. Human nature, we want to avoid the hard conversations, right? And I think it's important for there to be and I think there has been in your county a willingness to engage in those hard conversations and move them forward. And so I think it's the same approach on housing, and in particular affordable housing, that is in partnership. Now, there's not a single party ever who gets up from the table and is absolutely pleased, right? I mean, because that means that someone else is feeling pretty bad, right? And so I think what you're looking for is equally dispersed displeasure across the negotiating table, and so what that means in terms of tools is, I mean, you have to be very serious about the financing and very serious about the terms of any land or land development opportunities that you're including. You don't have to. You don't always have to give up the land. You can ground lease it to folks. Use a structure. Use that as a structure. So that way, you know, it's an incentive for folks to act the right way. You can embed a call option so that the county or its nonprofit development partner has the right to purchase the thing at some strike price. I mean, these are sort of practical considerations. And you all, is Baltimore County a participating jurisdiction for a community development block grant? It's its own. So that's a powerful tool right there. Consider what you're doing with community development block grant. I know what you're probably doing, what most counties and cities are doing, and that's, you know, supporting a good number of the nonprofits. Super valuable. So I'm not going to tell you what your priorities are, but ultimately, you've got to figure out how, if you're serious about this, to make affordable housing a significant priority. And just, I'll leave you with this, you know, housing, we begin every day in housing and hopefully we end every day in housing, right? We begin it housed and end it housed. And it's the center of everything. There can't be a functional education life or recreational life or even work life if, you know, you're not housed somewhere. And so I think that's the spirit with which you have to go forward and make these recommendations. That feedback's not me.
To expand on the question that Steve asked about flipping, our group discussed last time when we have the opportunity zones and the disinvestment zones, that we can't just let the disinvestment zones slide further and not think about how they can become opportunity zones. And you added this other piece that when you are in the opportunity zones and you don't have the infrastructure, then it won't work either. If you could maybe tell us a little bit about in Montgomery County how how these two pieces, how you address them as a whole county, where you all work together to add transportation or services into opportunity zones that at the same time reinvest into non-opportunity zones so that investment would actually go there.
Yeah. Look, I'd love to paint you a rosy picture about how counties all work together and join hands and sing songs and make housing happen together, and I'd be telling you a fib. And so, look, we try hard to partner with the full spectrum, and sometimes we're super successful, and other times we're not. And so I find another partner. If we can't partner with government, then I partner with private sector. If we can't partner with private sector or government, I partner with nonprofit. We can't partner with anybody, we go it alone. And in terms of how do we work on and focus on areas that have suffered disinvestment, we need to look no further than our own portfolio. And that's the first thing I did when I got to HOC. Took a hard look, right? It's like, just like I see these deepened, more furrowed wrinkles in my forehead, I took a hard look at our own portfolio. There's an opportunity. There's one, right? And we started to gen those up. And at the same time, we took advantage of some of the law on the books, and we became acquisitive and started to gen that up. And then here's a redevelopment opportunity. Here's a chance to bring in a developer who's different than we are, who imagines it differently, and sort of pushes us. And so I think it's a full spectrum, all out aggressive approach. There's not a lot of nicety in this. I mean, I wish I could tell you that there isn't. Ultimately, it's time and money on the line and land, and control of those things. And I also tell you that, look, for zoning should be difficult. It should be hard to get through. It should be challenging to change the way the whole skyline looks, or the landscape of an area. If not, then we might look like some other places in the United States where you got gas stations sitting right next to elementary schools. We're not. Now, do I think it could be a little more efficient, a little easier, a little less costly, so that I could pour that money into domiciles? Sure, absolutely, 100%. But what I will tell you is, you generally get a product that is worth its salt here, after having been put through the planning paces, and the financing paces, and then the construction. I mean, I think the way the road to how to invest in areas, or where to invest rather, is simple. Look at the neighborhoods that are in your county. Look at the ones where the bus doesn't run, or that you've got the highest level of police reports in, right? Look at those where you've got the worst performing schools. And that's where you start on that component of it. And simultaneously, you work in those areas where there's incredible opportunity for folks to make room for people who might not otherwise be there.
Stacy, do you all do scatter site?
We do.
Well,
Well, we do, and most people do scatter site really poorly. We're better at it now than we were 10 years ago, but scatter site is hard. It's incredibly difficult. It's incredibly difficult.
so stay away from it.
No, I'm not. I would never tell you to stay away. I think there has to be property management infrastructure that is significant. But no, I would never tell you to stay away from it.
This is Grant Countess. You mentioned that if the person's not committed to mix, and you sort of show them the door. You say, we're not the partner for you.
I'm not the partner for them. That's correct.
Right. And so are you then committed to a number? You committed to
You can't just do a number. It's not, yeah, Greg. Unfortunately, no, it's not as simple as, it's not a color by numbers kind of thing. It really depends on, the land cost, the financing, what you're imagining, the amenity package. Is it a redevelopment? Is it a scrape and rebuild? I mean, there's so many variables. It depends on the moment in time when you're doing it. But suffice to say that over 80% we have a mixed income portfolio. Over 80% of our portfolio supports individuals and families at incomes less than 60% of area median.
Hi, Stacy. This is Stacy Rogers. Nice to meet another Stacy, and also to meet you in person. Have heard a lot about you. To that end, in working with developers, trying to talk about that, especially if you're using mixed development and mixed income, getting a commitment to the units that we need to meet our, first of all, to meet DCA requirements, but the commitment to that, getting and incorporating that into agreements for funding. Can you talk a little bit about how those pieces work for you?
About how you incorporate the agreements.
In mixed development, having
Sure.
that committed part to pieces that we need.
Oh, got it. So we're the owner, right? I'm in control. I stay in control. I'm not negotiating it. It's not something that I'm asking you permission to do. And this is one of the things that got me, where people were always upset with me in Baltimore and then in Howard County and now in Montgomery County. I'm not going to ask you permission to do something on something that we own already. This is what we're doing. You in? Awesome. You're not? Maybe we can work together again. There's no hard feelings, right? I mean, I don't, this isn't about my emotions. This is about mission. So I think the best way to do it is to maintain as much control as possible. If you are offering up the property, as an example, even in a ground leasing scenario, then you have influence. If you're offering up some financing, then you've got influence. You got to use it. People will squeal very loudly when it's too much pain. I mean, that's the answer. I mean, there's not any magic sauce to it. I mean, Steve, I'm sure one of these days, maybe Steve will share with you, there were plenty of people who were upset with me in Howard County. Plenty. Hadn't changed much in Montgomery County.
Got it.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Sure.
Hey, Stacy, it's Terry. There's in the chat from Dan Pontius. His audio may not be working. He said that you had mentioned inclusionary zoning isn't a panacea, but gives you the space to make some financing work. You see that? You want to address that?
Yeah, I do. So what I mean by it is that the inclusionary zoning law, depending on how strict or not, essentially offers a mandate, right? And it really depends on what the legislative body does with that, whether it gets more deeply for affordability or not. It depends on that legislative body and what they decide. Now, if they've given you some room, then you have the opportunity for conventional financing. Not a bad thing, right? If more restrictive and it's a multifamily opportunity, then county government can consider it maybe, I don't know if you have a redevelopment um, agency, but county can float bonds. They're governmental bonds that, you know, allow you to work in this space. We do it. And so is that a tactic that you want to use? Right. Um, so those are just two. I mean, again, if the law talks about, as an example, workforce uh, as part of your inclusionary zoning, workforce is generally going to be 80% on up to 120, 110, depending on where you are, percent of area median. Well, you can finance that conventionally, because you don't really need any subsidy for 80%, right? That's what I mean. Yeah, I've done most of everything without 9% tax credits, but I already said I don't do 100% tax credit buildings in most cases. If it's a rehab and it's a senior, then we'll do it, right? But it's, you know, even the ones that we had, which were 100% tax credits, we thinned them out a little bit and diversified. Um, so yeah, that's it.
Stacy, Jim French here. Appreciate your refreshing perspective on all this. You know, in addition to financing and inclusionary zoning, you know, land use and those types of tools, you know, what would your thoughts be on, you know, changes to adequate public facilities ordinances to increase, you know, to give affordable housing developments sort of a preference or priority, you know, expedited permit review? You know,
I love that stuff. I mean, I think.
have you been successful at that, or and
well, yeah, Montgomery
cautionary
County,
tales? Yeah.
yeah, Montgomery County's done pretty well in trying to make changes there. Um, you know, the interesting thing though, Jim, is when you look at your own portfolio in your housing authority and you are able to see the disinvestment, right? Some people see the disinvestment, the glass half empty. I'm always like, ooh, this thing is half full, and here's some more opportunity for us. Um, uh, we can densify. We can do these other things, and I don't need a 9% low income housing tax credit to do that. I'm not going to ask the state for permission to finance. We already issue bonds. I know we're in the market all the time. I understand that as a tool and use it. We'll pivot to an equity partner. Um, we tried to do some deal. Ned's on the call. We tried to do some deals with Enterprise. Didn't work out, right? But we went and bought the property anyway. So like it's so for us. I think the most important thing, and I mean us broadly, is that we tick up and down the financial statement and look for those opportunities. And yes, those correlate to sort of the operating regulatory and legal environment in every county. And so yeah, APFO and all of those things, giving room, density bumps and the like are super important. So folks, I've got the chair of my board calling me here. So if we're gonna wrap it up, I've got to wrap it up. I know you got other stuff, but I suspect there's one of those transactions waiting for me.
Casey, you've
you,
been
Stacey.
incredibly generous with your time.
Sure.
Thank you for sharing some of your insights and experience with our group. I think it really helps frame our thinking about these issues, and so
Sure.
we truly appreciate it. You may not have heard the last of us. We
Okay.
want to follow up with you on some of the things that we talked about today. But for now, thank you so much.
Happy to do it. Happy to do it. And thank you, folks. Enjoy your summers. Hope your families are well. Wash your hands, wear a mask, socially distance, because the Delta variant is spreading, unfortunately. So take good care.
You too. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Take care.
Okay. Um, that was extremely informative, and hopefully everyone helped to find that as useful as I did. And thanks to those that helped make the connection with Stacy to get him in today. So and thank you for the thoughtful questions and back and forth. So next thing that we have on the agenda is report outs from our subcommittees. So why don't we move on to that? And I guess I'll just go in the order in which I've got them listed on the agenda. So public education and communication strategies. Terry, you're up first.
All right. Well, I'll get us started, and then there's a number of the subcommittee members on, including my new co-chair. I won't ruin the surprise. We'll get to that one in a sec. So we met thanks to lots of scheduling issues. We weren't able to meet till Friday afternoon of a 4th of July weekend. So I thank everyone who took the time to sit and meet with us. And it was a very good, robust conversation. I think one of the first things, Drew, that came out of it was the request for a friendly amendment that we add engagement to the name of the subcommittee. And the reason was not to forget that these aren't one-way communications, and that education isn't a one-way thing, that we need to engage with developers, engage with community, engage with residents and others. And so we'd like to, at least informally, if not formally, emphasize that. We talked a little bit in the meeting about needing a longer term communication and dialogue strategy that involves deep listening in addition to the communication strategies themselves. But we also understood and talked about the fact that these potential projects spring up and developers will come to the county and will want to talk to the community. So we need to be thinking also short term about how do we partner with developers to meet with community, what sort of toolkits, training, and others can we provide developers so when they go speak to the community, they're properly prepared as well. For instance, one of the things we talked about was having representatives of the housing office available to talk openly about what a modern voucher program looks like, that it's not what people always think it is, because the question came up, are there going to be vouchers in this project? And what distinction does that even make? So there was a lot of talk about sort of the long and the short term play around communications. Where we all came to this, Drew, was really this understanding that we need to treat outreach, education, and engagement with the same seriousness we would with inclusionary zoning policies. And to do that, we need expert assistance. And so we talked at length about the county looking at its procurement abilities to look at whether we could contract with someone who could help us develop a listening and communications development strategy plan, and that we wanted the committee to be involved in vetting proposals from national experts, of which Dan's reminded us there aren't a lot of people out there doing this work at a high level. It's very few, in fact, which might make our initial job easier. So action items were to report out today. I'm excited to say that Felipe Filomeno volunteered 100% fully on his own without coercion to be the non-county co-chair of this committee, and with his work at UMBC and in the community makes an excellent partner in this work.
Congratulations, Felipe. Thank you.
And with that, I'll say we're going to be asking some of these different experts we've talked to put together some brief proposals that we can discuss in the subcommittee. But Felipe, did you want to add anything that I may have left out, or your own thoughts on the work or where we came out at the meeting?
I think you got it covered. I think one of the main things that we will try to learn from the experience of other jurisdictions, research that exists out there about best practices in engaging communities to reduce opposition to affordable housing. And I think, maybe hiring a consultant that already has experience in that could definitely help.
Great, thank you. Anybody else from the subcommittee want to offer any quick thoughts before we move on? All right. I'll
Thank
leave it
you,
there.
Terry. If it's the will of the group to add engagement to the focus and to the title of the group, that's certainly fine by me as chair. So we'll make the updates on that. Thanks for the suggestion. And it sounds like the biggest takeaway for us right now is to focus on that piece about potentially looking at bringing in a consultant to help us with some of that work.
Mhm. Drew, with respect to engagement, I think as we continue to talk, that really does speak to what we have to do. That's like the action.
Mhm. Yep, agreed.
All right, that's it for us.
Okay, great. Thanks, Terry. Thanks, Felipe. Next up is zoning and infrastructure. Pete Gutwald is the chair. Pete.
Good afternoon, everybody. We met on the 28th of June. Interesting, based on the conversation we just had from Stacy. A lot of the conversations focused on the fact that on a lot of zoning issues. However, our group decided that we needed a bunch of data collection completed before we can move on to making recommendations. So they've asked to put some information together, which Jen Meacham has already done and put together. And I put it out to the work group already on information related to permits over the past couple of years associated with multifamily and townhouse developments. They wanted to see what kind of patterns of permits that have been approved in the county. There was a focus on, they want to focus on larger developments rather than the single scattered site approach. They think it's more successful if we did larger developments. So the discussions started talking about what kind of zoning classifications and what is the level of zoning classifications in the opportunity areas? What type of zones are in those opportunity areas and how much of it is in there, because they don't think it's just necessarily residential to focus on, maybe some of the business and manufacturing zones to focus on in terms of inventory of sites. So we put together some information associated with how much acreage is BR, you name the zoning classification in each of the opportunity zones, and then we'll do a presentation at the next meeting on that information. Jen will be doing that.
May I speak with Angela Martin, please?
Uh-oh. Somebody needs to mute.
Okay.
Then we also talked some of the development review process, the possibilities of modifying that development review process for affordable housing, such as limited exemptions. But there was the conversation that zoning is not the end all be all, that they don't think that just requiring developments. There was a conversation about requiring developments to include affordable housing in each and every development is the answer, similar to what Stacy said. It was interesting to hear him say that. And then we talked about the definition of what is affordable housing. How are we going to define affordable housing if we were going to have it as part of the development review process? Is it 60% or less? Is it 80% or less of AMI? Those kinds of things. We talked about that. And then there was the discussion of other financing mechanisms, the possibility of some state funding, which I'm tardy on doing some of my homework with the Maryland Department of Planning on some of that, of the state funding availability for us. And one of the things the work group decided that interesting, since it's zoning and infrastructure, they're focused on zoning right now. I asked about infrastructure and the group said, let's deal with that after we go through some of the data and some of the information associated with the zoning classifications and development in the county. So infrastructure has sort of been put on hold for this work group, where we're dealing it with in two different sections. So maybe it's another subcommittee or something to that effect that we discussed earlier. And I will, drum roll, my co-chair. And I won't say it was that exciting and put forward like Terry had. I think videos kind of turned off when I asked for a co-chair, and everybody scattered. But Leslie Dickinson stepped up and said she would be the co-chair of the Zoning and Infrastructure Committee. So that is my report.
Thanks, Pete. And
unless
thank
Leslie
you,
or anybody else has anything else, sorry.
I have a couple comments. I thought it was interesting that Stacy Span was just here discussing inclusionary zoning. Our group, it is one of the first things that we began talking about, but our group is also heavy with nonprofit developers. So now after hearing Stacy, it makes sense that they were not that enthusiastic about inclusionary zoning because they don't need it. And that would be something that we would want to look to for-profit developers or other types. In terms of what Pete said, we did ask Jen to give us data on what exists currently in different business and commercial zones and industry. Of course, there is the issue that I brought up where, they might be in the correct, appropriate, acceptable, whatever census tracts, but you can't just, in our view, in the complainant's view and likely heads, I'm not speaking for head, building a multifamily housing in a former shopping center is probably not going to go that well, but certainly it's fine to be looking at, what's how the land is zoned and what's available before we, move beyond it. And I think one of the things that Stacy Span just commented, which is, I think, relevant to this whole thing is is basically be open to anything. It sounds like he will do anything. He's all about, that doesn't work, let's try this. And I think that would be a really positive attitude to have going forward with this process. And yes, I was appointed chair. I gladly accepted, but I did not volunteer. Thank you.
Thank you for accepting the nomination and stepping up. We appreciate it, Leslie. Quick question about the data collection. So, Pete, did you request some information that Jen already compiled and was distributed to the group?
Yes, she did. And we will do, she'll put together sort of a, she'll talk about it in the context of the information, but we did send out the information. I'll forward it to you to make sure you got it as well.
Was that to your subcommittee or to the full work group?
Subcommittee.
Yeah,
I was just.
Yeah, I just want to make sure I didn't miss that.
There's something that went out on Friday in an email, and I know Greg Countess got it too, or maybe Greg's in our group. Maybe
yeah.
there.
So the information that went out on Friday was an attempt to address some of the data requests that were made at our
prior
work group meeting.
Okay. And I'm not sure I got the email that Pete's talking about either. I don't know.
That just went out today. Out today. Yeah.
Lisa Morris sent that out. Okay. All right.
Yes,
got it.
Lisa did that for me.
All right. Okay.
So we'll take a look at both pieces and maybe look to compile that into one, and then maybe ask Jen to walk us through it at our next meeting, if that would be helpful.
Hey, Pete, while you're there, I started looking at that information you did. Are you guys at all indexing that across your opportunity zones? I saw that's countywide, but I'd be curious what the percentages are within the actual opportunity areas, especially your VCA areas.
Yeah, I think we did. I think is Jen on here?
Yes, I'm on here. I can't remember exactly so I know what I did for Pete for the subcommittee. The original stuff that we sent out, I think, was inside the URDL, I believe.
Right. So she sent out both things. She sent out stuff that her original presentation, and then she sent out additional information regarding the specific to the subcommittee.
Okay, I was just curious whether it was cross-referenced with the actual the VCA census tracts, just to see how those percentages change within the areas of where you're trying to focus.
We did that with zoning classifications, yes.
Okay, I must have missed that. Thanks.
But I think when Jen, are you talking about her doing that at the next housing, like the next meeting of this group, going through all the?
I think Drew is suggesting that.
I think it'd be good if she did it together, incorporated, what she's given us for the subgroup along, because there's all these different pieces. So it'd be better to kind of comprehensively understand the data.
Okay, I think there's two separate issues, but I'll look into it. I'll talk to Jen offline and Drew.
Okay. All right. So if that wraps up our conversation on zoning and infrastructure, we will move to legal policy and best practices, and Steve Lafferty.
Thank you, Drew. So we had a more free-flowing conversation than as sophisticated as Pete's was. We started off really with the premise that there is no stated housing policy in the county. Within the consolidated plan and within the master plan, there are references to elements, but there is no stated specific policy. It was suggested that the VCA may be a benchmark, but also to look at the assessment of impediments, but also then to put such a statement, create such a statement that actually goes in Master Plan 2030 to ensure that becomes sort of the guidepost for the county going forward. We didn't have as much conversation about the legal implications. We'd hoped to get into some of that, but James couldn't make our meeting. We'll take that up at another time, but his interest, of course, was making sure that the legal requirements and guardrails are in place, whether it's the VCA, fair housing laws, ADA, that we all take into account as we're thinking about strategies and direction. Something that came up in the meeting, in the conversation with Stacy a few moments ago, had to do with this issue of the breadth of the focus. A lot of conversations around the construction of new units or the redevelopment of buildings. A lot of conversation focused upon how do we, if you will, protect or to enhance existing communities, fortify the housing in the communities that exist, and basically ensure that they see improvements that sort of help to lift the quality of life in the communities that are already in place. And whether this is through a vacant house strategy or introducing different support systems, we again felt that took an equal role to looking at new ways of creating housing, and to make sure the conditions exist for strengthening those neighborhoods. We talked also about the phrase I used earlier, and it was flipping the script, that production in the county is driven by the development community. And question then is, what is the appropriate role? I think we tended to agree with Jim French's comment that the county should be a strong partner, a facilitator, possibly even be an intervener and more aggressive or assertive in its role when a developer is approaching and working with the community to address the questions that people may raise. And this goes to a messaging and engagement strategy, probably parallel with some of Terry's comments, that and Jim actually raised his experience in Overley, and while he had zoning as a matter of right, there was enough resistance and concerns about traffic and schools, and it didn't appear that the county government actually stepped in to help sort of find a smoother pathway to make such a project viable. And that perhaps the county should actually take a much more active role working with the developer who is out in the community trying to make a project come to life. Question about how do we transform non-opportunity areas, and whether or not the distribution of affordable units really is have we adequately addressed that? And it looks like from what Pete's work is, that's going to be an element that they'll address. And then we talked as well about what tools the county may have or may need to develop. Conversion of properties in commercial districts or areas was mentioned, consideration of community land trusts or receiverships, certainly inclusionary zoning, the issue of revenue bonds also was put forward, and also the need to examine the zoning process, which again, Pete mentioned there. So I know there's going to be overlap with what some of the other work groups are doing, other subcommittees are doing. and even to create a development authority that really does focus upon a funding and development strategy that the county would be leading. So those are some of the ideas that were surfaced when I think between now and when we come back together, we're going to take a deeper dive into some of what's going on in other jurisdictions, start to flesh out some of these ideas as well. So I don't know if any of my subcommittee members want to add on to that or correct me if I'm wrong.
Steve, did you guys select a co-chair?
We did not. We will be doing that. I feel behind the curve on that side.
No worries.
We have good people though. I know we'll find somebody.
Well, Steve, if I could just add to this, that Stacy's talk today and also the document that you have shared with all of us about the state policies and over the whole state of Maryland really jive well with our discussion, which was that we need to move in many lanes at once. And you just enumerated those. We can't just focus on the VCA. Can't focus just on inclusionary zoning. We have to go all the way over to even make affordable home ownership more prevalent and lifting up disinvested areas at the same time as making opportunity zones more accessible. So it's when we talk about these policies in this group, we had at least the aspiration to really cover more than what the VCA requires.
Great point.
Okay. Thanks, Steve, and thanks to the other subcommittees as well. Sounds like there were some really substantive discussions for the first convenings of the subcommittees, and I'm not sure if you discussed scheduling moving forward, but I assume that there will be future meetings to come in the near future. So thanks for your continued work there. And as we work and as these conversations progress, we will start to figure out how to move some of these discussions into some findings and the outline of some findings and some recommendations that will start to inform the final product here. So more to come on that. I think we should convene with the chairs and have a conversation about the best way to do that, and to ensure that each of the subcommittees has the proper support in order to be able to do that. The next item on the agenda is sort of open discussion among the work group members. So floor is open to cover anything that we discussed previously, to ask questions of any of the subcommittees, discussion regarding Stacy's presentation, or anything else.
I just want to dovetail a little bit on some of Stacy's talks. Stacy, of course, started in Baltimore City, then went to Howard County, then went to Montgomery County, and is now going to Mid-City to be their new CEO, by the way, in case people didn't know. So he'll be on the development side here shortly. So he definitely has a plethora of experience. And he was spot on what he's done in each one of these, while they may be relevant, need to be truly vetted through the Baltimore County lens, which is different than Howard County, different than Montgomery County, and different from Baltimore City. It has elements of all of them in it. And I think the one thing that's most prevalent when he talks about mixed income, he talked about 80% of his portfolio is affordable. I get that, but I think they've been doing, when it comes to mixed income, some of their newer developments probably getting a much higher percentage than that. And it's a great tool and it should be used, but it has to be in the right areas. And the one thing I thought he left out was really the market. Market is a huge component of that. So when you're trying to do mixed income, When he says, what is that mix? Yeah, there is no set in stone. This is what it is. You've got to look at each one of those market components and know where a true successful mixed income development can exist. Is an area where a market is incredibly strong, because that mixed element to get those market rents to really have a true spectrum of all incomes across it has to be in a very, very strong market. And certain elements in certain areas of Baltimore County probably will not support that type of development. Whereas in Montgomery County, most everywhere will probably support it, and probably in Howard County as well. So it's just something to understand that, you know, we have to look at this through the lens of what Baltimore County is, and what areas we're working in.
Yeah, but then at the same time, as Steve pointed out earlier, that the investments happen in the strong areas, and they are diminishing in Baltimore County because of the lack of built-out areas. So they are not happening in the areas where inclusionary zoning wouldn't be possible. So if they're not happening there, that's not really a worry as much as how we make them happen in the areas where they happen, where investment is, and inclusionary zoning would have to be added to the mix. I mean, there would be opportunity if we actually enforced it. Because when you count out where the developments are, the market rate housing, it is in opportunity zones. It's in the non-opportunity zones, you have other types of development that is not necessarily market rate.
I wasn't talking through the inclusionary zoning lens, but yeah, from that aspect.
Well, right, but since that was Stacy's talk.
Yeah, those I look at from inclusionary zoning usually is in that 10%, maybe 15% range. I very rarely consider those to be truly mixed income, because really it's a market rate deal that has some affordability structured into it. It's not really what I consider a true mixed income deal.
Yeah, I don't know if this may be relevant, but I do have a question. Does anybody know what their local representatives feel about affordable housing, what their goal is, or what their thoughts on it is? I mean, I'm in District 6, and I really begin to think I really don't know what he really thinks about it. So I was wondering, does anybody else know what their representative or thinks about the affordable housing?
Well, I'm in Council District 7, and I'm pretty certain he's opposed to just about everything.
Yeah, I think the political winds can blow differently with the same representative. Who knows? And that's one of the things that hopefully, you know, I'd love to see a result of this and some of the zoning policies. Too much of the zoning, and I can tell you, you know, I've been involved in, I don't know, 10 deals in Baltimore County since I've been doing this, and not one of the deals that we have done as an affordable housing deal has had the zoning in place that was necessary to do what we did. So in every case, we needed a PUD. And in every case, we needed the council representative to be supportive, or at least be willing to introduce the bill, which, you know, it's hard. and most of them were senior. There's a reason why, you know, there's a problem with, you know, people doing too much senior, because when we tried to introduce housing, but you know, it's a political hot potato, and in Baltimore County, unfortunately, there are not multifamily densities that are of the density level that's necessary to support the type of housing that we construct generally. I mean, DR16 does not get it done. I mean, typically you're doing 25 to 45 units per acre on any of the 4-story elevator type structures you're doing, and that zoning doesn't really even exist in Baltimore County. So to try to do the things that we've been doing, we've always had to have a Baltimore County council person and a council resolution and a PUD go through to be able to make it happen. And that, I hope, is something that comes out of this, where maybe some of that gets pulled off of it and goes in and gets put in legislation, so we can handle it through a different process and not be 100% dependent on politics.
I have a question for Drew, if I might ask it. Drew, I think, you know, one of the things I'm thinking about is sort of the scope of the recommendations and the output of this working group and the committees, and what goes into a final set of recommendations, and maybe what gets put aside or isn't included. But I mean, I think a lot of that, some people might say, well, those are the guardrails that you're working within. I like to kind of think, there's this kind of ultimate range of, possibilities. And if this is really going to have a significant impact on people's lives and be long lasting and be sort of a model, for other jurisdictions, for the country even, can we tackle things like, the ERDL, the immutable ERDL that, was established in 1967, when, I think it was Dale Anderson was the county executive then, or maybe it was Mahoney or somebody, but, maybe there was a reason behind, establishing a ERDL back then. And maybe something that's lasted that long, needs to be rethought. And kind of in that same line, I was thinking, overcrowded schools, should that be a reason not to, build affordable housing? I mean, can the boundaries of school districts be, looked at, if really what we're trying to do is achieve sort of a mix of incomes and a mix of student population, so that the persons from, children from more disadvantaged environments, have a better chance in life. And then, the final kind of big thing I was thinking about, this kind of goes to what others have been saying about county council people. Is there a possibility, to change the zoning process so that county council people, don't have that kind of authority to come in the 11th hour and, take a project that was, as of right, and then change the zoning so that, it can happen. So those are my 2 cents about sort of, the set of recommendations that we're going to come up with.
Yeah, Jim, I think all of those things are relevant. And I think for purposes of our discussion and sort of the creative and iterative process of doing this, everything is sort of on the table. What form those recommendations ultimately take, I think remains to be seen and is going to have to be discussed among. I imagine there will be some easy and obvious things, and there will be some things that are much more difficult to do, right? So I also imagine that there will be some items that there is consensus among the subcommittees and all of the work group members around. And then there will be some items where there may be some differences of opinion. And we'll have to figure out how to address that in terms of how things go up to the executive. I don't have it. I imagine that some things will be, solid recommendations, definitely do this. And then I imagine there are some items that, might be a little bit more nebulous, like the ERDL, where we're saying this is something that the work group thinks needs to be looked at. And here's how it could impact affordable housing. So I think there are a couple of different forms that those recommendations could take, and kind of what falls into what category, I think, is going to have to come out through our discussion. So I don't mean to give a non-answer, but I don't think that there is, any sort of decision yet on what all of that is going to look like. I think for now, we're still in the process of having preliminary discussions, getting the issues out on the table. I think that we're starting to see the things that we want to be focused on. Like I'm seeing those things emerge, seeing those major areas emerge, which is good. Obviously, we're still collecting data and looking at that. We're continuing to bring experts to the table. So I think we're still sort of in that phase of this work, but there will be a shift that has to occur soon where we start putting, words to paper. And, there's just going to have to be discussion among the group as to how those recommendations are captured. So, but I think those are really good thoughts, Jim.
Just Jim needs to understand that touching the URDL or the school districts are two third rails in Baltimore County.
I suspect he knows that, but.
It is also, of course, a relatively easy cop-out to say, well, we're just extending the water sewer districts and have more land available. So sprawl, I don't know whether that would be the answer. I think one of the committees today made the recommendation to look at the BL zones and the commercial zones, which are way oversized, as a way to open up developable land. I think that would be a much more promising avenue.
Perhaps maybe throwing the URL out there for discussion might cause, oh my God, well, we can't have that. I guess that means we actually need to accommodate these people within this boundary or something. Like, it might help, force some people to grapple with something in a more real way when they.
Right. Good point. Good point, Amy.
It's certainly what Montgomery County did, because, I mean, they have a sort of URDL as well, and they did not move it.
And I'd like to comment on Amy's chat message. I think it would be good if we can see just really where the council members stand. I think one of the issues, again, is what the definition is of affordable housing. I still think that is at the base of all of this, because I think that drives some of the decisions that are made when council members come forward and make their changes, because it's being driven by what people perceive, and that's at the heart of the problem.
Yeah, Stacy, I mean, we know it's in the VCA that we have a certain percentage is going to be 30% AMI and certain percentage will be 60% AMI. So we know that. So that's what affordable housing is.
Right, but is that the definition they're using when they make the decisions?
Well, there has to be, I don't have it in front of me, but there have to be, in terms of hard units anyway, there has to be a certain percentage that are 30% AMI. So I don't know where, I don't have it in front of me. I haven't really looked at that in detail, but it's probably in the VCA that shows X number of have to be. Yeah,
it is, but we know that some of the perceptions about the VCA as well.
I know, but it doesn't matter because it's the VCA and it's binding on the county. So, I mean, I'm not really sure what that means.
Right, but I think having the discussion, I guess if we're really going to do some of what Stacy said, we gotta be willing to have the hard discussion. And a big part of the zoning and how things play out with these projects is perception. Let's call it what it is. It is perception. And while we that work very closely with the VCA from the compliance standpoint are aware of what it means, I don't think that comes into the final decision making.
Right. So yeah. So I'm not saying it doesn't have to be explained. I'm just saying it is in there. We know what it is. I think the other thing that Stacy Spann made pretty clear is that like we don't, when we talk about this, we as the Affordable Housing Work Group or as you all in the county are looking into this and talking to people, we don't want to perpetuate. It's one thing to have a direct conversation, but it's another thing to sort of perpetuate the stereotypes as a, oh my God, somebody with a voucher might move into my neighborhood, right? Because they are stereotypes. And like he was even saying, depending on where people are and what places look like. And certainly if you want to warehouse people who can only pay 30% or, have a deep subsidy in a former parking lot, in a new, or in a former mall, yeah, that's the type of thing that, yes, will perpetuate the stereotypes of a bunch of poor people living together, because that's what it'll be. And no matter what kind of financing or zoning you want to call it, inclusionary zoning, you want to do mixed, like Stacy said, that's what's actually more acceptable to people, because everything looks the same. And if you can live here and you can keep your yard or your balcony nice, or it's like, who cares? Like you were saying, who cares? Who am I to ask you where you get your money, when we're not going to ask someone who's middle or upper middle class? It's like, oh, maybe you got all your money ripping people off and like some Ponzi scheme, right? But if you're rich, nobody's going to ask you that. So I think that what he said, we can conceptually try to incorporate, but not just not this stuff he says like, oh yeah, we have to have the hard conversations. We also have to look at ourselves and say, are we perpetuating the stereotypes, or are we trying to actually ourselves understand that this isn't necessarily a bad thing?
Well, I agree.
Different types of housing in different
I
areas.
agree with you, and I think his point was well taken. And that we have to approach it that way. Would we ask anybody else, or is that how we operate? Societally, we don't.
Right.
We don't operate that way, and that's what I mean about hard conversations. Because every time one of these projects opposition comes up, it's all about the stereotype. Well, that's not what we're trying to do at all. I mean, I think mixed income, mixed use is the way to go. But I think Stacy's point of how we have a double standard in terms of what we ask, what we expect, is the stereotype. And I think sometimes that perpetuates decisions that get made.
I mean, I hate to join in on this conversation. It's really rather interesting, but when we start talking about perceptions, I mean, this is just not a perception about class or how much money you make. This is also a perception about what your race is and whether or not you'd be welcome in my particular neighborhood or not. And so, and the reason why I asked Stacy the question about mix is because, and that's interesting, is because there used to be a hard and fast rule that mix would be 1/3, 1/3, 1/3, but particularly you're talking about a certain type of housing. And I think that, that itself is a question that should be open to challenge by this particular task force. And I'll leave it there because it's 4:53. And I know folks want to get out of here by 5.
I agree with your comment, Greg.
Well, the thing that Stacy made clear is that when you're in the different lanes, you talk about different types of housing and then also different residents that move in. So the way I understood him to talk about inclusionary zoning, he said that works best for 60% and up, and that affordable tax credit deals work better for lower end brackets. And if you want to include the low brackets into the opportunity inclusionary housing deals, you would have to throw money at it from the county side. And so I think we should start talking about this in these different buckets that we have the issues, because otherwise when we mix them all up, we always we'll describe the problems but don't find the solutions.
Greg, you did my job for me, which is to remind us how much time we have left. So we now have 6 minutes remaining. So anyone else that's planning to chime in, please keep that in mind. Okay, not hearing anything.
Actually, I have a question for Marcia, because I saw now that she's here.
Sure.
About the status of the emergency housing vouchers, because I saw in the minute she was gonna get back to us on that from last meeting.
Leslie, we can take that longer conversation offline, but we've not finished up getting the input back from the roundtable to finish the MOU
Okay,
yet.
like
So
the continuum of care, or is it a different?
yeah. The round table equals COC. It's got to be a collaborative
Okay.
process, and we're waiting back for some of that. But I
Okay,
want
that's
this
okay.
done.
I don't.
Yeah.
Can I ask one more thing? Do you know?
Yeah.
And if you don't, that's fine. Whether the people, the eligibility category of fleeing domestic violence, will they be applying also through continuum of care, or will it be a separate entity? And do you know that yet?
The rules of the rules of the voucher program.
And you're muted.
We had already
Oh,
planned on
sorry.
doing this, but the rules require to work with whatever the coordinated entry process is, and we have a separate domestic violence coordinated entry system.
Okay.
So we will be working. Yes, that's going to be a big part of this.
Okay, great. All right, thank you. All I need to know. Appreciate it.
I'll follow up with you, Leslie, as we get closer.
Thanks, Terry.
So before we wrap up, as always, we do have a portion of the agenda for any public questions or comments to be acknowledged. So I did just want to quickly, if you haven't seen it already, bring everyone's attention to a question and some comments that have been made by Greg Cantori, who it looks like he's been on for the duration of our meeting today. So thanks for your comments and your question. And perhaps there are a number of comments, and there is. I just wanted to read his question. One really hard question is how we will break single-family exclusionary zoning that removes over 75% of residential land from any affordable housing. Will we consider encouraging rental housing, duplexes, tris, quads, and ADUs in single-family areas? I think that's a question that is probably a good one for the zoning and infrastructure subcommittee to perhaps tackle and to keep in mind during your next conversation. So I would ask Pete, you and Leslie to take that one up at your next meeting, and to keep that in mind as you do your work. And I will also point out that Greg provided his contact information in the chat as well. So thank you, Greg. And I don't see any other comments or questions from other members of the public. So
I don't see the contact information.
if you look in the chat,
Q&A, yeah.
I'll send it to you.
I'm in the chat. Okay, that's good. Are the subcommittee meetings open to the public as well? I'm not sure.
Leslie, I do not believe that they are.
Okay.
We can ask James Benjamin from the Office of Law to get you more information about that to the extent there are any questions.
Okay. All right. Thanks.
Okay. So with that, take a motion to adjourn in a second.
Motion.
Second.
Second. Anyone opposed? All right, the meeting is adjourned. I want to thank everyone for their time and their thoughts today. Much appreciated. And looking forward to connecting with everyone through the subcommittees and on to our next meeting. So thank you.
Thanks, everyone.
Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Take care now.
You too. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everyone.